Welcome to Around the Empire. This is a fully independent podcast. Lend your support patreon.com/aroundtheempire, rockfin.com/aroundtheempire, paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm your host, Joanne Leon, and our guest today is Margaret Kimberley. We talk about the recent assassination and leadership change in Haiti and the campaign for a U.S. military intervention. The details of the assassination are important, but the fundamental issue is the undermining of Haiti's sovereignty and who's really dominating and determining the rulership of the country. From the Black Alliance for Peace, an excerpt, a rogues gallery of international actors, supposed friends of Haiti, have intervened in the Republic's internal political affairs, handpicking the face of Haiti's government while determining who best can serve Haiti's imperial masters, says Jemima Pierre, Haiti America's coordinator for Black Alliance for Peace, unquote. In a bonus segment, we talk about the relentless regime change operations in Cuba and the current events happening there from a perspective of self-determination for a decades-long target of imperial powers. Margaret Kimberley is the author of the book Presidential, Black America and the Presidents, and she's the co-founder, editor, and senior columnist for Black Agenda Report. She also writes her own blog, Freedom Rider, and she's a member of the coordinating committee at Black Alliance for Peace. Margaret Kimberley's here talking to us from New York. Hello, Margaret. It's great to see you again. Thanks so much for coming back on the show.
Oh, it's good to see you. Thank you.
So let's talk about Haiti. I have to say first off that there's a lot of confusion around the situation, but I basically looked at Black Agenda Report and you and your colleagues for this, because I'll never forget that in 2011, the war in Libya, where you guys pretty much had a different take than everybody else, including all of my friends, almost all of my friends on the left. I took a lot of heat for, and I can imagine what you guys went through. But you were right in the situation in Libya back then. It was not at all anything near the mainstream narrative. So, that's why I come to you in situations like this. And I look to you guys first for your perspective. There's been a lot of confusion. I'm kind of more interested in who ends up in power, because when you're talking about mercenary forces and all of that, I mean, who knows who it could be? Who knows who?
Well, the point is who's in power in Haiti? The oligarch families, the international community. So, quote unquote, there's something called the core group. There's a UN special special representative for Haiti. Her name's Helen Laline. She decides what happens in Haiti. So the United States, France, Canada, Spain, Brazil, all decide what's going to happen in Haiti. So it's the rich Haitian families who are mostly not Black. They're either very light skinned, so not even thought of as Black people. Some of them are descended from Middle Eastern immigrants. They run Haiti on behalf of mining interests, on behalf of, the Clintons brought they're sweatshops. I mean, they had some special name for them. And when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she forced Haiti wanted to raise their minimum wage from 24 cents an hour to 61 cents an hour. And she put the kibosh on it. And she picked the president after the earthquake because, well, the election didn't go the way they wanted. So she got them to have another election. So nobody in Haiti has a say in these things. Nobody who's interested in the people of the country and what happens to them. So Haiti is not an independent country. Excuse me. We saw, those of us who pay attention to these things saw these huge demonstrations. Moïse,
Yeah.
Was supposed to step down in February as per the Haitian Constitution. He proceeded.
Like really massive, really massive.
Yes, hundreds of thousands of people for weeks and months, general strikes, got no attention in the corporate media. You know, they gin up some protests, modest protests in Cuba, and you hear about it all the time. But these massive protests in Haiti that went on for months got no, unless you read Black Agenda Report or follow our work at Black Alliance for Peace or other left media, you knew nothing about it. So Moïse was America's puppet. Now, the only interesting thing about the assassination is who did it and why they did it. Yeah. Is it one of the people I mentioned? Nobody knows who wanted him out of the way, because he would have done whatever the United States told him to do.
Yeah, that's the thing.
So it is interesting, I guess, to try to find out who did this. I mean, we know there were Colombian mercenaries and some Haitians who carried out the actual shooting, but the why behind it is something we don't know. But it's also confusing because we don't want Moïse to look like a sympathetic character. He was horrible. He chose to stay in power when the Constitution said he should be out. He had innocent people arrested and sent to jail. He did all kinds of horrible things to the people of that country. So he's no one who should be seen in a positive light. But the situation that I've just described means that his absence doesn't make the country any better off either. So this is where we are now with this country that is still under the heel of foreign interests. And this is, I wanted to bring up some history. I'll quickly talk about it.
No, please.
Haiti, the revolt against France happened in 1804. But from the time Haiti overthrew the enslaving nation to be free, it's been targeted ever since. In the 1820s, France threatened to re-enslave Haiti and sent warships in the 1820s and 30s and demanded that Haiti pay millions of francs in compensation. It ended up being something that's like $25 billion now, and they were paying it back until the 1940s. Woodrow Wilson sent Marines to Haiti in 1915. They ended up staying for 20 years. The US also stole money from Haiti, ended up in Citibank. The Duvalier family, Papa Doc and Baby Doc, were all US puppets. When the people had a chance to choose their own president, to choose Aristide, Clinton sent in troops. They forced Aristide to live by the IMF rules, which means the people were being impoverished. George W. Bush ended up kidnapping Aristide altogether. And even philanthropy, after the terrible earthquake, millions of dollars poured into Haiti. None of it reached the people. I remember a few years ago, there was a story about the Red Cross. They raised $300 million allegedly for Haiti. It all went to NGOs. They didn't even build houses. I mean, I think that's what people thought they were doing when they were making contributions to help Haiti after the earthquake. So that's the situation that this country is in. And it's important for those of us who pay attention to these things to have this information so that we aren't confused by this argument that Haitians can't, this racist argument, these Black people can't handle their own affairs, or are they better off with the US intervening somehow? The last thing Haiti needs is US intervention. Haiti always does badly with foreign interventions of various kinds. So that's not it either. Haitians can control their own country. They can have a real democracy, but all of these bad actors need to leave them alone.
Yeah, that's always the basic plea. And I could see that was, what was coming out from Black Alliance. Your immediate stance you took was, don't interfere, just stay out of it.
Right.
So, and the other thing that I didn't know was that not only had he overstayed his term, so, he was an illegitimate leader, but he also dissolved to have a parliament or a Congress or?
Yeah, they have I believe it's a parliament. They have a legislature, but it doesn't benefit the people. So it's this democracy in name only, kind of like here, where it doesn't really mean anything. The legislature works under the control of all these forces I mentioned, these core group of nations, the IMF, the UN, even the UN, they sent occupied Haiti with troops. They even brought cholera to Haiti. There were troops from Nepal who basically dumped their poop in the water, and people died. More than 10,000 Haitians died. Actually, that's the low estimate. So the UN doesn't help Haiti. The philanthropists don't help Haiti. The US certainly doesn't help Haiti. And so that means that the people who are supposed to be in power and supposed to be able to influence what happens in the country are also powerless.
So the story about how the new head of the CIA headed to Colombia a week before this happened, and then these Colombian mercenaries, turn up and they're part of the operation. Do you think that's relevant, or is that like we don't even generally even hear the movement?
It's hard to say. He also went to Brazil, when Lula is going to run for president again next year. The case against him was exposed as a fraud, and he would probably defeat Bolsonaro. And but then the CIA guy goes to Brazil, and Bolsonaro says, well, even if I lose, I'm not going to leave office if I think there's any corruption. So then he was also in Colombia. Colombia is a U.S. client state, a U.S. colony. They've made it a branch of NATO somehow.
NATO partner or something.
Some designation like that. So it could be connected. It's just very murky. But as much as we want to know the details, and as useful as that would be, I think the most important thing for us to know is that Haiti remains this country that is subservient to others, where the will of the people is not followed because of outside interests interfering in the country. That's the most important thing to know about Haiti. It's even it shares the same island with the Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
And the French took over some of it, but then Spanish took over most of it, and they gave the French some of it anyway. So Haiti's about a third of the island. Most of it is the Dominican Republic. Haitians go there to work, and they took their citizenship. There were Haitians who were immigrants or descendants of immigrants who were considered Dominican citizens, and they changed their constitution. They changed the rules and made them stateless people. And this is really quite terrible. So, and then there's hurricanes, earthquakes. It's like, you can't catch a break, but most of Haiti's problems are caused by people, are caused by the interests that I have just described.
So the statement this afternoon from Black Alliance for Peace, this is Monday evening, we're July 19th, we're talking. It says, Black Alliance for Peace must remark on the colonialism occurring in real time in Haiti. On Saturday, the core group reversed course and named Ariel Henry the prime minister. Today, Claude Joseph, former prime minister and self-declared president, announced he will step down.
Yep.
The core group announced that Haiti will have a new government by tomorrow. Haiti civil society, hate that word, had been meeting last week and over the weekend to determine their fate. But the core group upended all of that and dictated without any input from the Haitian people. As we had indicated in a recent press release, Haiti's white rulers have determined Haiti's political future. It doesn't matter who pulled the trigger to kill Moïse, because the pan-European colonial capitalist powers are responsible for Haiti's suffering. So who is this core group again, and what did they do?
Yeah, UN ambassadors of US, France, Canada, Spain, and Brazil, because the UN had some sort of a mandate to take over Haiti in the wake of the kidnapping of the president, the wake of the earthquake.
So that's what, like a decade ago now, right?
Yes, it is. But they still, so Haiti's in fact this colony of these other powers. And this is where we have to be careful with we tend to see the UN in a positive light. It is the place where nations come to talk. It is the place where good things can happen. But it's also a place where weak nations like Haiti can be mistreated. And it's where the powerful countries go to get what they want. And so under this UN auspices, which is supposed to be so helpful, we have the same thing of the United Nations sending troops. And after cholera, the United States said that they had no legal obligation to even compensate Haiti for the deaths that their occupation created. So we have, and this, since the assassination, they changed their mind. So first they said, well, you know, Joseph, he's our guy. And it's like, well, not him. It's going to be this guy, Henry. So they decide among themselves who is going to run the country. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with this constitution that Moïse was trying to rewrite. If that is going to be the constitution in place, but it's not going to be anybody in Haiti who gets to decide. No one who has the interests of the people in mind who's going to decide this.
Now, Claude Joseph, or however you pronounce his name,
Joseph, it's French, Joseph. I'm going to say Joseph.
Okay, good.
I don't know.
Please correct me. So he was only recently appointed as prime minister, right?
And Moïse's ability to appoint a prime minister was in question. So it's just illegitimacy on top of illegitimacy on top of illegitimacy.
Exactly. All the way
so
down.
Moïse wasn't supposed to be president anymore, but he picks a prime minister who is in effect the successor should anything happen to the president. But then these people come in and say, we'll let you know if it's going to be you or if it's not going to be you. And the next week they're like, never mind, forget what we said. It's going to be this other guy. It would be comical if it weren't so serious. But Haiti, this news about them switching choices was actually very new to me. So I'm not as on top of it, frankly.
Just happened, yeah.
Yes,
right?
As I would like to be, because this happened today. But the other thing I wanted to mention is that the FBI is assisting in the investigation. Right. This is not an agent. First of all, what are they doing outside of the United States? The FBI is supposed to investigate crime in the United States. I'm not sure how they end up investigating anything in Haiti, but it goes back to, Haiti's de facto colonization. They can't be trusted. The FBI are nobody for us to trust. We shouldn't trust them here. This is a group of people who are hostile to all liberation movements here. They're not going to investigate anything in the right way in Haiti when the U.S. has God only knows what involvement with this assassination. The assassination does make it easier for the U.S. to, on the one hand, Moïse was a puppet and did what the U.S. wanted him to do. So there are all kinds of rumors. It's like, well, the oligarchs got mad and got rid of him, or he was stealing money and not sharing it, or we don't really know. But the outcome is not going to be good for the people. And as bad as he was, his assassination doesn't benefit the people of Haiti at all.
Yeah, there were a couple stories of interesting aspects of it. Something about and this might be rumor, something about an energy deal that he was possibly involved in with Turkey. I didn't even know that Haiti had energy resources, but I know there or some in the area of Cuba. So, I mean, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, Haiti is near Cuba. It's good to look at a map at times like this. Haiti also has gold, and these Canadian mining companies play quite a role all over the world. Not a good one.
Yeah.
In influencing countries everywhere, including Haiti. Aristide returned to Haiti. I don't know what I fear for his life. He's
still around?
Yeah, he was. I believe he was in Canada. He came back. There were rumors that he had COVID and he doesn't. But I was just looking here. I'm cheating a little. People by the thousands walked to the airport to greet him. He's still the man they want. He returned from Cuba. And he's still the choice of the people. So, but that also, and Cuba is kind of involved because the US is hostile to Cuba because it plays this independent role. It acts as a sovereign nation. So of course he would go to Cuba. Where else would he go for medical care in the region? And the Organization of American States, which is headquartered in Washington, that's all you need to know, is just does whatever Washington tells it to do. So this group of nations in this hemisphere who should have independence, who should be able to speak and debate among themselves, are just another US puppet. And the fact that Aristide has returned, that's the interesting thing to me. What will happen with Aristide's return? Yeah. How will people respond? Will there be mass protests? That's the thing that I'm looking to see.
Now, the guy who Ariel Henry,
mm-hmm.
I've heard the name, but I don't know who it is.
And I'm also at a disadvantage.
Okay, so we'll just skip over that for now. But I mean, I guess they're saying, well, don't worry. We're not really taking over the country because we're just what we always do with regime changes, we try to install an interim government.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's what they are claiming they're going to do here, and elections will be held.
Well, they still saying that, what's the man's name in Venezuela? Guaido is the interim president.
Yeah.
They just made up this fantasy. And the British, who have stolen Venezuela's money, I'm sorry, I'm skipping around a little bit here, but I feel like there's a connection that was in a bank in London, unfortunately, and the British just refused to give it back to Venezuela. It's not theirs. And they say, well, we don't think the president is the president. The guy we say is the president. And so we can keep Venezuela's money. And Venezuela plays a role in Haiti. When Chavez was still alive, before the US sanctions really destroyed that country's economy and it was able to sell its oil resources, Venezuela helped other countries in the region, including Haiti, and sold them oil at a very steep discount, in effect gave it to them to help these countries and to play a role helping the entire region. So, but the people never saw the benefit in Haiti. There's millions of dollars that Venezuela used to help Haiti. First, the US pressured the Haitians to stop taking it. And then even when it stopped, people wanted to know, well, where did that money go? Well, not to them, obviously. So I bring that up. I bring up Cuba, I bring up Venezuela, because this is what the US does in this region where people still call it America's backyard, without a hint of irony, by the way, that these are countries that are not to do what they want to do. They must do what the US wants. And anyone who deviates from those rules is punished. So Cuba for 60 years is living under sanctions, Venezuela living under sanctions. And just a reminder to your listeners, when the US sanctions a country, it's not just that individuals and businesses and banks can't do business with the target. The US actually claims that it has the right to sanction any other country that does. So let's say, I'll pick a name out of thin air, Japan says, we want to, break the US sanctions with Cuba. Well, then Japan would be punished and they wouldn't be allowed to do business with the US. So it's very cruel. They don't exempt food or medicine. So Cuban scientists have come up with a COVID vaccine, but they don't have enough syringes to protect their population. And this is what we see. The details change, the names change, but the US does not change and claims this right to dictate to countries in the region, or actually anywhere in the world. It could be the other side of the world in Syria or somewhere. But it's important to keep all of these things in mind because that's the thread.
Yeah.
The details of who killed Moïse, we may never know, but we know it's part of a pattern. It is part of a dynamic that the US has followed for centuries now against other countries in this hemisphere.
Yeah, in that light, the pattern, the sphere of influence, if you will. Not that, I mean, there's been a new focus on Latin America and Caribbean country, just the whole region for a while now. Mm-hmm. When things heated up with Venezuela again, and then there was Bolivia, and I mean, it's endless. Mm-hmm. And it has been happening for my whole lifetime, for sure.
Yeah.
But it ebbs and flows. But lately, so we have a new administration now. We think, all right, well, maybe it's going to calm down. Maybe they're going to back off, because the Obama administration took, at least nominally, an easier stance on Cuba. Mm-hmm. Well, that all gets flipped over again when Trump comes into office, and you figure, well, maybe when the Biden administration comes in, it's going to go back to at least Biden, a slightly friendlier, but he's just continuing.
Biden follows Trump. It's interesting to me. Biden, he was Obama's vice president. So Trump withdraws from the Iranian nuclear deal. Does Biden switch back to what Obama did? Nope. Obama restores diplomatic relations with Cuba. Does Trump, Obama could not, I don't know how serious he was about it anyway, couldn't get rid of sanctions. That is a law that Congress passed, the Helms-Burton Amendment, which means the sanctions against Cuba cannot be dropped without congressional legislation. So,
wait, can I just stop you there for a second?
Sure.
Do you know, so sometimes the Treasury Department, the executive branch, seems to be able to unilaterally but what did they do? They put a special condition on the Cuba ones that said a president can't do this. You have to involve Congress.
Yep.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So Congress, only Congress has the right to overturn sanctions. So you would have to have a president who is willing to lead. You would have to have assuming that, Republicans are, Cubans are an important part of their constituency. Cubans who call themselves exiles, who live mostly in Florida, an important voting electoral state. So they'll never do it. So even if you'd have to have a Democratic president who was very serious, who had buy-in from Congress, and you can't just assume that Democrats will do the right thing. Just look at Biden. So he could. So Trump unilaterally. So Obama, for example, Americans were limited in how much money they could bring to Cuba, where they could go in Cuba, what they could do there. And Obama lifted a lot of those restrictions.
Yeah. Trump
got rid of them and went right back to the old way. So you can only fly to Havana. You can't fly to any other city in Cuba. You can only bring $10. I'm exaggerating, but you can only go if you're proving that you're, going to do research or something. Oh, Biden could change those things. He could go bring it back to where Obama was.
Yeah.
But I think what's changed in those 4 years is that the US, I think imperialism is in crisis, even as the US has the power to create all this misery around the world. It can't really control events the way it wants to. So there are other countries emerging who, because of the way the US behaves, become allies, like Russia and China. So they have, I think they learned the hard way that they have to stand up to the US together. And we were talking about Libya. I don't know if it was before we started recording or not, but
no, it was in this, yeah.
Okay. Back in 2011, the Russians and the Chinese, because they're permanent members of the UN Security Council, could have vetoed the no-fly zone, which helped to destroy, because the Libyan army was winning. But they were, who knows what they were promised. They were sweet talk. They were probably lied to. Maybe they didn't care that much.
I think they say that they were told it was not going to be a regime change and they believed it and all that.
Yeah, but I think ultimately they didn't care that much. But then comes Ukraine, and the US overthrows a country right next door to Russia. So it's constant aggression. And so now they are, they have this alliance. So Iran sends oil to Venezuela, assuming the Israelis don't blow up their ships. Iran sends oil to Syria. China is helping them to some degree. So what happens, I think, is they get the opposite of what they want. They can create this chaos, they can create this havoc, but in so doing, they bring other countries closer together because they see the need to defend themselves from the United States. So Trump suddenly decides about a year ago, China is the enemy. We have to close the consulate in Houston because they're spying. You can't use TikTok. TikTok has to be taken over by Microsoft and the Chinese Communist Party. It's, those words must have done well in focus groups because they went on and on about the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese students shouldn't come here and Chinese journalists shouldn't be here. Because China is a competitor with the United States. China was fine as long as all they did was make cheap stuff for us to buy at Walmart. But now they're an economic competitor. Their economy is only slightly smaller than that of the United States. And so, of course, they turned on a dime. They were like, wait, this isn't what was supposed to happen. You were just supposed to make cheap stuff for us to buy. And instead, you have this country with this amazing infrastructure, which I think it's funny that Americans are always told that China's stealing secrets and they're spying. So China has like 10,000 miles of high-speed rail. The US has 0 miles of high-speed rails, and yet we're told that they're stealing something, they're stealing secrets from us. I mean, come on. Who would steal from the backwoods nation? All we have is the power of the dollar and military power, although that's considerable. So anyway, we've gotten off course maybe somewhat from talking about Haiti, but I just felt the need to tie this in. And I think that's why Biden his foreign policy is essentially the same as Trump's. I mean, Trump is the one who started removing troops from Afghanistan. You can't give Biden credit for that. And I also wonder, removing troops from Afghanistan to do what with them? To send them where? I don't think it's what I would or others like-minded people would like to see. Maybe to send them to Haiti, maybe to attack Cuba, maybe to attack Venezuela. Who knows what they will do? But it seems that if, I know we were told that we had to vote for Biden because of harm reduction, but that seems to have been illusory.
Yeah, I think it's not really a Biden administration. I think it's a coalition of, I don't know, what I usually say, the worst of the worst. I think they had to cut a lot of deals.
Sure, they do. And if you notice what they do, when they're out, so Obama's people like Blinken, when there's this revolving door, so, Hillary Clinton loses, so they go out. And Blinken starts this consulting firm. Basically, he's like a lobbyist for the Defense Department, and he got even richer than he was already. So that's where their interests lie. They are not people who want to see positive change anywhere in the world. Their interests, they represent the interests of people who like the status quo or even worse than the status quo. So Trump loses, they come right back in. These are not progressive people, not at all. Their point of view about the world, it's still, all about US hegemony. and the US being able to do whatever it wants to do, and calling the shots and controlling countries, and telling China, you may make a lot of money, but you're not going to do anything differently than what we tell you. So they start a whole propaganda campaign about the Uyghurs, and they're all in concentration camps. It's all a lie. We can talk about that in greater detail some other time, but nobody should believe anything they're told about human rights abuses against any country the US is targeting. That's one of the ways they got buy-in with Libya, right? Gaddafi was going to massacre people. His soldiers were taking Viagra to commit mass rape. That's how they get the buy-in. So we have to always be aware of that. And then we always have to ask ourselves, other people have a right to sovereignty. They have a right to have governments that are different from ours. And the US doesn't have the right to say, you can't be who you've chosen to be. And if you are, we are going to drop the hammer and make life miserable for you. So those are the things that people have to keep in mind, because nobody wants to be, that's why they peddle this responsibility to protect and human rights abuses, because they know most people don't want to be on the side of a genocidal country, or ignore concentration camps. That's why they talk about it all the time. It's very cynical. And they get people to go along with things that are truly horrible, but they lie about what it is that they are really doing.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not following closely or don't have access to someone who is, it can be very confusing trying to figure out what side you're on, if you even, decide to take a side. I think a lot of people just go like, I don't know. I just.
Well, you don't. And if you take one of the things that, we've talked about this before, one of the things that I think is so sad about this country is that there are a lot of people who do want to know what's going on in the world. So they think I'll read the New York Times, I'll listen to NPR,
that was me for a long time.
Yes, me too, for most of my life. So then I'll know what's what. But you still don't know anything unless you know who to follow on social media, or certain and the foreign outlets that they tell you not to listen to. So the United States will decide that Iran's press TV they confiscate their website. You can still find it, presstv.ir, by the way. You can still find it. We talk about a lot of international issues at Black Agenda Report by reading blackagendareport.com, Black Alliance for Peace. Speaking of Haiti, if you go to Black Alliance for Peace /Haiti, you can get updates. We have a very active group working on issues regarding Haiti, among other countries. And you can see our statements on a variety of issues. So we see ourselves as people who can give information, who've studied these issues. And so for those people who have this feeling MSNBC is not on the up and up, there are places to go, but you have to question enough. You have to ask yourself, is this really true? You have to have the energy and the inclination to look. And that's unfortunately how they get away with a lot. So what do most people know about Haiti? Oh, it's this country that they can't run their own country, and they need America's help. So yes, of course, America should intervene, because those Haitians don't know what the hell they're doing, and not be told any of the things I've just said. I've never seen the New York Times write about the theft, France or the US thefts of billions of dollars from Haiti. They just go along. That's another problem. The corporate media.
It's by omission. There's a lot of stuff.
And some of it's omission, but some of it's telling outright lies. But they're on the side of the state. And even when Trump was president, who they didn't like, all these outlets I just mentioned, they would still go along with Trump when push came to shove. So the United States says they have the right to assassinate the Iranian general Soleimani. The New York Times didn't think it was a bad thing, but they didn't think it was a bad thing when Bush said that the US should invade Iraq either. So those are the obstacles that we have to getting information. But I think it's important to remember that we have other options now.
Yeah, and people who are watching this stuff, like even at times I don't want to read about, you know, some country, you got, you know, in your outlets, you're following this stuff all the time. You're not just the pop-up experts when something heats up, you know. You know, I was starting to take one thread before we roll into a bonus question. I guess, well, when Samantha Power was put in charge of USAID, I'm like, oh my God, because she is Ms. R2P, right? Ms. Responsibility to Protect.
Yep.
She never met a regime change that she didn't like. And so when this started happening in Haiti, I'm like, oh my God, it's another regime change operation. But, and I noticed in your Black Alliance for Peace, you've got sections. You got Afghanistan news update. You got AFRICOM watch bulletin. You've got other things like that. So just real quick, because I know we can't spend much time on this, but in the past, what, I don't know, 6 months, how many leaders of African countries have been knocked out? Either they died, or they were couped, or they disappeared. I mean, are we looking at just what should I think there?
Well, you should assume that's always something bad behind it. The U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, the U.S. has divided the world up into these sectors of command. There's a NORTHCOM and a SOUTHCOM and a EUROCOM and an INDOPACCOM and a AFRICOM, which started in the last days of the Bush administration, really expanded.
Where they can't even host their headquarters.
No, they hosted in Germany.
On the continent, right?
But, you know, nevertheless, now you have U.S. bases all over Africa, drone bases in Africa. People weren't even aware of that until a few years ago when our army soldiers were killed in Niger. So the U.S. has this big footprint, and there's only a handful of African countries that have not accepted AFRICOM. So Africa is still this place where the major powers compete with each other. So China has made inroads there, mostly economic, with infrastructure deals. It's not a perfect situation, but they're better off with China than they are with the IMF, that's for sure. So they have
for now deals. Anyway. I mean, I'm on wait and see there.
But the Europeans haven't left. There's a French billionaire who controls, this is something I just discovered in the past month, named Bolloré, who controls all of the ports on the western coast of Africa, French guy. So the colonizers never stopped colonizing. So it's always important to look at the background of these news stories. And we have U.S. Out of Africa Network. You can also see that on the Black Alliance for Peace website. So you can have greater understanding. But I think to sum up, you can say that control of Africa's resources is still a major component of foreign policy towards every country on the continent. So yes, so you should wonder if there's a coup in country X or President fill in the blank disappears mysteriously. You should wonder who was behind it. You should wonder if the US was involved. I think that's the only prudent thing to do.
So let's roll over into a bonus question. Just keep it really high level.
Okay.
Because we've already sort of asked for a lot of time from you, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on the situation in Cuba and what happened there, because I don't know.
The answer to the bonus question is in the extra bonus segment for patrons. You can get access to all bonus content by subscribing at Rockfin or Patreon, plus other perks like patron live streams, Zoom calls, and access to our Discord channel where we can talk among ourselves. So that's my pitch, and I hope that some Margaret, thank you so much. If you would, just please tell everybody how to find your work, how to follow you, how to support you.
Sure. I write every week in Black Agenda Report. That's blackagendareport.com. My Twitter is Freedom Ride Blog. I have a Patreon, Margaret Kimberley. And as I've said before, Black Alliance for Peace is a great resource of information for so many of these issues that we have discussed this evening. So if you're wondering where to get good information, those are the places where you can get it.
Take good care. It's great to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Margaret Kimberley. Follow Margaret on Twitter at Freedom Ride Blog. Find her work at Black Agenda Report and at her own blog, Freedom Rider Blog. This podcast is independent media, listener support, really important. Rockfin.com/AroundTheEmpire, Patreon.com/AroundTheEmpire, PayPal.me/AroundTheEmpirePod. You can find the audio version of the podcast on any podcast app. You can find the video version on YouTube, on Rockfin. You can find everything on the website AroundTheEmpire.com. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Follow on Twitter at AroundTheEmpire, and we'll see you next time. Take good care, everybody.